All right, now we're going to switch and take a little bit of a look at some work up in central Wisconsin. And Erin Grossman, who's a manager for Portage County, Buena Vista Wildlife Area, and she's going to talk a little bit about some grazing projects that she's going on there. Great.
All right. Like Randy said, my name is Erin Grossman. I'm a wildlife technician with the department. I work up in southwest Portage County, mainly on the Buena Vista Wildlife area. And as Sarah mentioned, we've been doing grazing up on that property for many years, going on like decades. It's been continuous grazing, so what usually happens is cattle will put out there mid-spring and then take it off at the end of the season and just let it set stock. So a couple of years ago, we got interested in managed intensive grazing, moving rotational grazing, essentially, moving the cattle every day. Ideally, in some cases, we move cattle every other day. Right now, that's kind of the minimum that I ask folks to do just to achieve our objectives. But going into this process, the biggest question is this realistic? Are we going to be able to find ranchers that are willing and able to move cattle on a regular basis and that do have a little bit of the knowledge to be able to help us manage these properties? So that was our first question. So I was lucky enough to find an individual at a pasture walk who also happens to be a grazing specialist who owns his own herd, but we still went in with some concerns. On the DNR side, is the rancher going to be sensitive to our goals and objectives, for wildlife? What do we do if drought occurs? I always think back to 2012 and how bad it looked up there, so that's always on my mind. How do we address overgrazing? It's removing cattle from the pasture. That's a big production. Will the rancher try to take advantage of my limited knowledge of livestock needs? I did not grow up on a farm. I am not a farmer. I have done some research and been to pasture walks, so I have gained a lot more knowledge, but a lot of biologists and technicians were not farm brains, so we're counting on their knowledge to be able to help us. And then the big one, will the infrastructure fail? Water, fence, those are all really, you can't have water fail in the middle of July. We are very water intensive, so that was a big fear of mine as well. Also having cattle out on the roads is not a good thing. Rancher concerns. Who is going to bill and pay for this infrastructure? It is a big input of money, fence, water, and of course livestock. Whether you're raising Holstein steers or beef animals, you need weight gain. So poor quality forage, these are not improved pastures, excessive heat if you have no trees, fly parasite control, poisonous plants, predators, and then will the DNR want to control what happens with livestock? So those are some of the concerns both parties had going in. I usually give this presentation with the rancher that I work with on this project, so I'm going solo today. So the DNR has some priority goals, and those are to learn and utilize livestock as another tool for habitat management. We use spraying, mowing, prescribed burning, but this just hoping to add another one to that toolbox. And also expand opportunities for partnerships within the agricultural community and take advantage of this local system. I think the timing is really good for all this right now, frankly. So, and then specifically on Buena Vista Wildlife Area, these are our habitat management goals. This property is approximately 14,000 acres of state managed land that is managed primarily for grassland birds, prairie chickens. So these are the goals that I had for this specific parcel. It's 320 acres. I'm just going to talk about each one of them a little in more detail. So increased grass and form diversity, height and density. Most grassland birds, whether it's warm season or cold season, what they really want is structure. They want a variety of structure and a variety of species. So whether it's cold season or warm season, there's been research saying that species doesn't matter so long as it's diverse. So with this project, we're using different stocking densities, movement regimes to try and achieve that differing, to get a little bit of diversity in that structure. Some areas, we can use a bigger paddock so they don't hit it as hard. In other areas, we can trim them down a little bit without sacrificing weight gain to do a lot of trampling, run lots of trees, and kill those plants that we have. We also did a little bit of, we have some pretty big areas of musk thistle where nothing is growing underneath of it. So, and of course, the cattle don't really want to go in there either. So we have done a little bit of interseeding red clover just to try and get cattle into those areas, knock down those stems, and increase the fertility there as well. So that's been something that we've noticed after the first year. And a lot of forage went up just with that input of manure urine.
The disturbance actually matters too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, with grasslands be a disturbance or they're not going to be grassland anymore. So,
Let's talk about this as we're kind of looking at some bringing soil health issues back around. One of the big parts of soil health that they talk about is inputs and animals. The relationship with manure and urine is part of the nutrient cycle as well as bringing in the biological cycle. But what you're trying to mimic is health filters, right? And of course, fire is a big part of the tools that we're used to. So we're massive herds of millions of animals walking across there, trampling and doing the things that they do to mix up vegetation.
Right. That really hit, I don't know, at Grassworks last year, Ray Archuleta spoke about soil, and that really struck a big chord for me in terms of management, literally from the soil up. We spend so much time thinking about, or I do, about what's on the surface. And really, we need healthy soil to have bugs, to raise birds, to do everything. So I just got pretty excited about that. But so what we're also doing, we do have some test plots where we interseeded some meadow fescue because that has good standability in winter, red clover, and then also trichome season grass seeds. We have clipping in some of those and not clipping. Like that center slide, that's not trampled, that was clipped on the left and left standing. And then on the far right side, that's where we do have some of that red clover coming in pretty well in some areas that didn't really have a lot of vegetation to begin with. All right, and then another one of our big objectives is to reduce invasive species. And on a grassland, trees like that center picture at Aspen, they're not really invasive to Wisconsin, but we don't want them in a grassland. That makes it a woodland. So for us, they're invasive, so we want to reduce or get rid of those. Musk thistle is a big one for us. Spotted knapweed, willow, and spirea. Reduce reliance on mechanical and chemical management. Mowing and chainsaw work. Some of the good things about those are we can really control where it happens and when it happens. But they're time intensive. They require diesel fuel. It takes getting a tractor to a place. So if we can bring the cows in to do that work for us, that's a benefit. And also reduce herbicide application. It can be quite effective, but feel that the more we learn about herbicides, especially in our natural areas and their effects on little critters, the less I would like to use them. I don't think we'll ever get out of that game completely, but it's still a really good tool in some spots. But if we can find a way for cattle to again do that work and have similar results, I think that's a win. And then also, like we were talking about, improve soil and water quality. Increase that root cycling depth, have those roots go deeper, hold that soil better, have that cover on the soil surface so it doesn't dry out as much, and increase our soil biology. All the little bugs and critters in there, that's really important. We'll be talking about some of that and some concerns with ivermectins and fly in a future slide here. So I'm sure some of your students or some of you have seen this slide before. On the left this is a well-managed farm with crop rotation. So you can see you know, and I'm not a soil scientist. I took this slide from our grazer, who is a soil science major. But the aggregation of the soil, if you compare that to the rotationally grazed soil on the right, that soil is all aggregated into that clump there. So even between well-managed farm fields to a well-managed rotational grazing field, you can see the benefits to soil of a well-managed rotational grazing.
Just for a second, why that matters is that the one on the right have that infrastructure that gives the water, pours in the soil, and allows water to infiltrate versus when you have the conventional tillage and it breaks that up, what happens when the water does begin encrusting on the surface. And once you do that, you essentially have a cement field out there. Water doesn't infiltrate very well. So what soil health really is trying to do is water management. And that's why you keep your cover crops.
Yep. Less inputs, it's money savings for everybody for our water. So, rancher goals. Number one goal of any producer, increase and make profit. If they don't make profit, they're not going to be doing it and nobody wins. Other opportunities and goals are to raise livestock or increase their herd of owning land. And these are goals for state lands. Utilize the home farm for winter crop, fall, winter stockpile. And then train the cattle to eat a wide variety of vegetation. If it doesn't kill them and they eat it, it's food and it's nutrients. So,
for this class in particular, one of the things that is the parents some of our students are well established on their own. A large number aren't. They're looking to get in, trying to find out how. And that's one of the things that I think is pretty unique about this opportunity. Is one of the hardest inputs for a farmer to buy is land, especially around here. And then it's the hardest thing to kind of get to the point of where you're actually making from that land. So this gives you an opportunity to start to build a cash flow where you can build up some momentum, you can have a herd starting to get into, you can get experience, all the things that are important when you actually do own land without having to purchase land upfront. That large cost of buying land. Sometimes it's hard to buy land when you're in farm. It's not all. There's a large competition when it comes on market. So this is the opportunity.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, this isn't like improved pasture. It's pretty rough, but I noticed within 1 year we did have a significant increase in forage in this one pasture. And these are just some of the stats that we've got on the left, the Iowa average for red cows, live calves, and then the results that the rancher had on the first year on Buena Vista. So, he has a red Angus herd. Pretty good genetics. He's quite proud of his herd, so really good genetics, and these are his results after the first year, which are all above the Iowa average. In that first year, that grass looked like not very great. So, but additional things to consider. He is about half an hour, 45 minutes away, so over part of our way from this parcel. Travel time. He does this daily. He does move daily. We do make, I help him out a bit because I get a lot of information from this rancher, so we do make considerations and help as needed. A couple animals had to be treated this past year and one removed, which in a big paddock can be somewhat of a challenge, but he was able to do it fairly simply. And then, like anytime you have cattle, markets are also pretty important consideration. So just going into those goals a little bit further, like we mentioned, learn how many animals you can manage, you call it no risk ranching, and then just give yourself an opportunity to learn the ropes, which can be a little scary for us as managers if you're just learning how to run cattle, because we don't know how to necessarily do it. So there is a little bit of back and forth and learning from each other. And the reason that this project has worked so well is we communicate all the time. There's compromise, and my goal is to become the ranchers. And that's a really important part. Is butt heads not going to work. So having life goals.
Well, and that's true no matter who you're working with.
Right.
You're trying to find an opportunity to work with a landlord anywhere. You're going to have to find that way to communicate and make sure that everybody's goals are the same.
Then you learn from each other's expertise. I've got my wildlife management expertise. If somebody knows more about beef animals or a lot about whatever that you're running, we're going to, listen from that. And like I mentioned, so the first year we had 30 pairs out there. Second year we had 61 pairs for the same time period. So that just tells you what that increase in forage was like. Like I mentioned, so the ability to cut hay at home, to use as winter forage, reduce the amount of hay you purchase, and increase days on pasture. Being able to pasture well into, I think we pastured into December. It was a pretty odd year, frankly, for the fall, but to be able to increase your days on pasture. And that's where its results there. Like I mentioned, if it's any plant that's not going to kill or unduly influence those animals, it's food source. I've heard we have a few plants out there that have some interesting effects. For example, willow, that's a salix, so that has some healthful properties for cattle if they eat it, which they don't usually choose to eat it, but if sometimes they'll get a taste for it. So right now, his cattle were trained to eat spotted knapweed prior to showing up on the property just because they worked on his brother's property that has spotted knapweed. So that was good for us. They are eating some thistle. We did some treatments, and I'll show some pictures. Spraying it with a blend of molasses, salt, and water down just to get them to eat that thistle, which it was pretty cool. It worked. They don't really eat the goldenrod. It's pretty skinny, but that can get trampled. And then that's more sunlight gets to the ground, so that's a good thing for us. Like I mentioned, is the plant poisonous? And then how much? And also the importance he stressed, don't starve them. With the daily moves, it's that competition between animals that gets them to choose things that they might normally not want to choose. So that's why I have a minimum of every other day. Because if the rotation is too long, that competition between animals is decreased, and we don't get those results of eating some of the stuff that they might not normally want. These are just some pictures. So a couple times this year, he took this molasses salt combination, poured it on the thistle rosettes, and like in some cases they had already flowered out, put it on some of the flowers, mostly just around the water tanks, because that's where the cattle hung out. Most of it was easiest for us to do that. So that seemed to work. One day on the left, you can see it's kind of a poor picture, but that musk thistle with flower heads on it came back one day, and somebody in the herd had eaten all the flower heads off the thistle. So we're not sure who was doing that, but because he does run cow-calf, hopefully she taught her calf to do it, and the process will go on. So that was pretty funny to see, actually. They hadn't really eaten the plant or the leaves, they ate the flower. So, yeah, it works. And then eating brush. So aspen it's a little sweeter, so I think a little easier time getting them to eat aspen rather than like some old species. Probably not as palatable. But if they don't eat it, like they rub the heck out of this plant. It's the only thing out there. They're all going to rub off on it. So that serves the purpose too, eliminating brush. And then on the right, I believe that's just some trampling. You've got the goldenrod on the right. They just trample along this fence line. But more soil with sun content. So talking infrastructure. So there was no well, there is no power out on these properties. This pasture is a half-mile wide by approximately 1.25 miles long. So it's 320 acres. It's the biggest pasture that we have out there currently. So the DNR provided and installed the high tensile electric fence. We do 2-strand high tensile fence. And this has a single strand down the center. You rotate the big old circle. There's about 6,000 feet of above ground 1-inch water line. We started with 1 point well. It's very flat up there. If any of you are familiar, it's like flat as a pancake. There is some relief, but very minimal. So we started with 1 point well and 1 2,500-gallon reservoir. We're going gravity flow on the whole thing. And then we provided stem-end posts. So we had, well, let's talk about it now. We have a very high, it's very sandy soil, high groundwater table, so for us to put in sand points is fairly easy, so that's the route that we went. It's not that way. It varies greatly around the state, so anywhere you go, that's a big consideration for us, because we don't have water sources everywhere. And also on that flat ground, water doesn't always flow downhill. During the heat of the day, the oxygen, I don't know exactly the science of it, but oxygen in the water in that black hose, it was flowing upstream. So the heat of the day, in July, no water was flowing in those houses that have water. So shortly thereafter, especially for the whole length, we could get it down a little bit, but not that whole border. So we ended up putting another point well in on the other side of the pasture and just having that, more water, but then having that greater pressure. We were able to get water through the whole 6,000. That required on another point and to get another one of those 2,500 gallons, of course. So we're hoping to put in, it's my goal this year to get an actual well house. And because this is an area with a pretty large acreage base, so that we can do affect a greater area with the well. And not have to worry about, because we keep pumps every day, we just have a gas pump out there that's attached to the point that pumps water into those holding tanks. And then what the rancher is responsible for are the poly rails, 2 500-gallon drinking tanks, and of course fence upkeep through the season. It's their responsibility per the contract that they will maintain fence, and that it's their responsibility to keep their animals inside the fence. It's their liability. Yep. So he's got 2 and he leapfrogs them over each other. So it's pretty intensive too, but those 500-gallon tanks aren't cheap either. So he's just trying to manage his assets as well. So this is kind of the setup there. You can see here a 2,500-gallon tank. Because it is flat, we did raise them up. We made a little dirt mound and raised them up so we could get a little more pressure and to have a better flow. There is a 3-joule energizer. That's all. It's a little lower kilowatts than you would have at his home farm, but it seemed to keep the animals in so far. They're pretty used to electric.
Is it solar?
Nope, it's on a deep cycle battery, and those will last for about 2 weeks. Towards the end, as the growing season goes, I think he actually unhooked the bottom wire because we were getting so much vegetation up along the fence that it was just drawing it down. And by that point, the cattle, they had enough to eat, which will go inside, and they knew that wire was probably hot. We started out, that first year with these 1,000-gallon tanks, which are, I think they're 30 or 36 inches high, which are too tall for the calves to drink when they're young. So, this little guy didn't necessarily want to jump in there, but you get a bunch of cows pressuring around the water tank, he jumps, and she got out, luckily. But so, because of that, you can't really see it in this picture, but in the bottom right, there's a little black tank that he moves, and it's only about 18 inches high that the calves, and cows drink from it too, but the calves can drink from it more easily. So they always have water, and that gets moved big as well. Of course, we have poly wire separating paddock to paddock, and the calves don't eat much, but they can go back and forth a little bit. Mom gets a little upset if they're on the other side for too long, but Another big one is who controls livestock decisions. The rotation does determine some of the forage quality. But like I said, we do have a minimum, or I, on this property, have a 2-day rotation, days herd. They choose which livestock and age type. I prefer cow-calf, in my opinion, are really suited to these projects because the cows push calves and you get that generational. Shade provisions, I did agree that if he's really concerned, if we're going to have a heater of the summer, put structures out there. We don't want those cows to over. Right now, fly and parasite control is something that the farmer can decide. I think there's really good evidence. Minnesota has a grazing plan and they limit the use of ivermectins. And some other dewormers. I don't know exactly the specifics of it. But, so that's something that Wisconsin can have a greater handle on the effects of those and which ones are appropriate. So we're trying to raise bugs, we're trying to raise wildlife, so we want lots of bugs in our soil, essentially. And I just listened to a talk at Grassworks about the effects of ivermectins on dung beetles. It was very interesting. And again, predator control. So these are wildlife areas, Wisconsin. We have wolves, we have coyotes. He reduces some of that by capping it. We haven't had any issues with the tracks down the road, but he doesn't bring out those cats until they're old enough. They can have a fighting chance. The DNR contract does require requirements. We set the stocking rate. Like I said, set how often they're moved. Also, vet animals are 50. This is also in their best interest for that predator control. And because it is a public wildlife area, that they cannot prohibit the public from entering. That's a big one for us. It's public land. People have a right to be there. I mean, if there's harassment issues going on with people, then we'll deal with those. But
Yeah.
not that I've ever been there.
I think people can get it whether it's true.
I think so, yes. And the biggest thing is if you open a gate, close a gate. I mean, I work in a rural area, so I think there people in my area don't understand that aspect of it. I don't, in areas with larger cities, larger populations, there might be additional conflicts, but
I can speak to that a little
Okay,
bit. They
please.
had down in Dane County at Cook Lake Wildlife Area, it butts up against Oregon or Fireland or one of those suburbs of Madison. They had Scottish Highlanders out there, and it was right next to a road, and people started flocking to this area to see the cows. So when they moved them away from the road, all the people got really concerned with what happened to the cows, and we walk by here every day to see them, and I think they were feeding them and stuff through the fence too. But so I think people it's kind of a novelty maybe to the urban people.
That's funny. I didn't hear that. That's really interesting. So then just some results, and this isn't a scientific experiment, but just anecdotally, this year, the highlight of my year, and Sarah came up to see her, so I was there, we had rolling dung beetles. They were actually rolling balls of dung, which we had, there was a student from UW Stout doing some research. She had found this one, and then when Sarah was out there, we had seen 2 more in a fresh pile doing their work on the walking stick. And this is really important. These insects are really important, and it plays back into that discussion on dewormers. We're trying to raise grassland birds. When grassland birds are young, insects are a huge source of protein. So we want to have a wide variety and high density of insects on these properties. And then just some observations that in some research will back this up more, being there's a lot of research on grazing grassland birds. But well-managed rotational grazing will bring more birds to an area. Game and non-game. There is the drawback that you don't have any greater production in those birds because there appears to be more nest trampling. But you can offset that by longer rotations, having areas of refuge in and around your pastures. I know they recommend a minimum rotation length of 32, and correct me if you know better, 32 to 45 days. So you can stretch that out a little bit. You might sacrifice some forage quality, but if you stretch it out a little bit, it might allow some species to fledge their young and have a little bit more.
On the farm that we're partnering, they have a restored prairie, and the pasture that is adjacent to the prairie has a buffer for nesting time. So that they're big enough to that time frame.
Yeah.
It's just, it's mostly food. They can manage their own.
And they're finding that while most species, they're young or hatched, they're still really vulnerable in that young phase. So, being able to go in that July 15th, I know NRCS made their haying date August 1st for a reason, and I think that was the reason. But if you don't do any management, it's that line between managing so you can maintain the habitat and no management, and then you lose your habitat. So, yeah, they're just doing it a little bit. And that, I feel with, how this project is going, this managed intensive grazing or rotational grazing is another really good tool that we as land managers have. It's one that can benefit multiple parties and our budget, so that's a good thing.
One of the things I was thinking about with you having a cow calf herd, the cow calf herd on the home pastures can actually be sort of detrimental because they're larger animal and larger, or you get some compaction issues. So having that other property where they can go and benefit the property and not be home, bringing back stockers, sort of stocker, finish it, might be an interesting thing. Pasture management.
Yep. Yeah. And I think it would be cool to try outwintering on wildlife areas, but off the water, and you'd almost have to pull them off for the hunting season, then put them back on. So there's major concerns, but I've seen some of the effects it can have on your soil health. And it looks pretty sketchy in the spring, but not soon after warm up, it can look pretty nice. So again, it seems like a fun idea. I'm just not sure if we can do it on our wildlife areas.
Most hunting is over with by summer.
Oh yeah.
It'd be an interesting advantage.
Yeah.
So you have it come out for the summer, go home for have your paddocks stockpile for fall, and then bring them back. It'd be pretty beneficial.
Yeah.
The problem is water.
The water is a huge problem, and I know with moving, that is an extremely stressful time for the rancher that I work with. Just before it happens, he gets pretty anxious, and then once everybody's home. But yeah, it's pretty stressful time for him. So yeah, we just had, so anecdotally, we had a northern harrier or marsh hawk out there. He was moving paddocks one day, saw the nest, so he fenced around it so the cattle couldn't get in it. And then a couple days later, he was moving cattle and happened upon a northern harrier nest that had been grazed. And because it's a raptor, probably a little bit bigger than our other grassland birds, cattle didn't disturb that nest at all, probably because the harrier was doing a pretty good job of defending her nest. They're pretty good size. They're about 12, 14 inches tall. Right. So there's just some interesting things that we've seen. That last year there was a brood of prairie chickens that hung out in this pasture for quite a bit of the season. And we do have quite a bit of residual. On average, it's about 18 inches. So that provides them cover so they don't get hit by predators. But it makes it really easy for those chicks to move around. So it's been a very interesting project for me, and I've learned a lot, and I think the rancher has learned a lot. Gained appreciation. working grass and being able to. Yeah, with that.
Do you have any questions, Ken? No. All right. Well, I really appreciate both you ladies sharing these projects and ideas, and hopefully some folks from the class will maybe be interested, and I have some interest. I hope too. So